I never wanted to be a partisan lightning rod. I've always wanted to be a problem solver.
Hello, and welcome to The Conversation. I'm Dasha Burns, Politico's White House bureau chief, and every week on this show, I invite one of the most compelling and sometimes unexpected power players in Washington and beyond in for a chat to find out how they're navigating and shaping this incredible era of American politics. This week, I got the chance to speak to the president of the American Federation of Teachers, Randi Weingarten, and she's been at the center of some of the biggest political and cultural fights of this decade. But she tells me she never wanted to be a partisan lightning rod. We discussed how she fell into that role, the current battle surrounding public school funding, and why she says fascists fear teachers. Randi Weingarten joins the conversation. Randi, thank you so much for joining the conversation.
It's my honor. How are you?
I am good. We are careening toward the end of this wild year.
Emphasis wild.
Speaking of wild, you've seen a lot in the course of your career and your advocacy work. You've been at the center of some of the biggest political and cultural fights of the last decade. When you think about your role now, whether it's defender of teachers or negotiator, or partisan lightning rod, how do you define your job today and what takes up most of your time?
I know this is going to sound odd. I never wanted to be a partisan lightning rod. I've always wanted to be a problem solver. And I do think that Americans want problems solved. I think the reason that Americans at every opportunity vote to throw the bums out and vote for change is because they are very impatient with problems not getting solved. But I would say, as a school teacher, as a person who's worked in and around the labor movement for my entire adult life, as somebody who believes in civics and believes in America, this is a moment, these last 11 months, 12 months have been a moment like no other. I would never have believed that we would actually have to fight for whether there was a democracy that was broad-based. I thought that that conversation about going backwards, not going forwards, the conversation about whether we had a democracy was going to be a conversation about how you broaden and how you strengthen. The conversation about rights was going to be a conversation about how you broaden, how you strengthen. The conversation about schools, how you broaden, how you strengthen. The conversation about economy, how you broaden, how you strengthen. I never thought we would be turning back the pages in time, not going forward. That's been hard to get my both head and heart around.
You talked about how you weren't really interested in being the partisan lightning rod and roles you didn't want to play in this movement. But given the climate that you're talking about, what do you see as your role in this moment?
So it's clearly to show up. It's clearly to fight. But I think we don't reject the binary enough. The binary is the broken status quo versus the cruelty of Trump. I think we have to reject that and really fight for a third pathway, which is how do you make things better? How do you make life better for all? And the rich in the country have done quite well in the last, I would say, the whole century. But what you're seeing is that the middle class has gotten eclipsed and the poor and working class are really struggling. And that has created huge anger. You feel and you hear the anger, but people want problems solved. It's not like they want the other side defeated. They want problems solved. It's a time that really requires very facile leadership that's not hyperbolic, but that really fights for people. And I think what you see in like a Mondani is that kind of leader. That's why there's such great resonance towards him.
Well, I was going to ask, like, do you think there's enough of that on the left or even in the center right, the sort of anti-Trump Republicans? Because I know you stepped down from the DNC this year.
No, there is
It is
not
a
enough.
challenge for Dems right now, right?
Yeah, it is a challenge. There's not enough because I think that Dems. So, how lucky am I? I don't normally think that the stuff I do is deeply radical. So that's why it's so kind of amusing to me that the right considers me such a polarizing figure. Because think about what I do. I fight for kids to have a decent education. I fight for patients to have decent health care. I fight for workers to have decent wages and decent retirement. I fight at this kind of intersection between education, labor, and politics. That used to be thought of as the American dream, but it's become radicalized because so few people actually have access to that in a meaningful way. And I think what's happened is that Democrats, and look, I'm a proud Democrat, I'm glad to be a Democrat. Democrats feel very comfortable fighting against a Trump, but not actually setting the table for what it should look like. What's the third way? And Trump Republicans, the MAGA base, basically are so pissed off at the world that has happened, they're ready to burn the place down. So the kind of problem-solving Democrats, like the Cory Bookers of the world, the Joe Bidens of the world, the problem-solving Democrats don't have a place in this red-hot environment of everything getting shaken up. And that problem-solving, though, in a democracy is key to actually moving people forward. So we're in a bit of a ironic cauldron that the solutions come from compromise, but the anger is so red hot on all sides that people compromising looks like weakness, not strength.
Well, one of the things that has people red hot on both sides of the debate is what the administration is doing with the Department of Education.
Oh, yeah.
They've been dismantling it over the course of his first year in office. How do you see that ultimately impacting education across the country?
So there's a real issue and there's a symbolic issue. And the symbolic issue is actually for American democracy, for the American economy, for American future, is actually more important than the real issue. So let me do the real issue first. Essentially, what they're doing is basically because Congress would not give up, would not let this administration take away Title I funding. They wouldn't let this administration take away career tech ed funding. They wouldn't let it take away funding for kids with disabilities. So they wouldn't let it take away the $20 billion that we have for kids who are marginalized across the country. So instead, what they've done is just tried to dismantle it to such a point and sell it for parts in such a way that the funding effectively gets dismantled. So it's terrible in terms of reality because it essentially is a funding cut for kids with disabilities, and it's essentially a funding cut for kids who are poor. So it is terrible. And all the people who are yelling and screaming about it being terrible, they're not doing it because they want the Department of Education. They're doing it because of the function that we now see will get severed and the money will be disinvested. So in reality, it's a terrible thing. In terms of symbolically, the reason I say it's even worse is because every country that does better in the world is a country that believes in education. We do education in America by states and localities, and we should continue to do that. But there should be a federal push, role, vision about how we are nation builders, how our economy is fueled by the best and the brightest, how our economy, our science, our research. What this is saying is that we believe in going backwards, not forwards, because kids are our future. The symbolism of this is what I am so red hot mad about, because it's saying that our kids don't matter. When you're saying, oh, no, that's somebody else's job, our kids. No, our kids should be the president of the United States job. And things that he cares about, like career tech ed and pathways, every president has issues they care about. Why is not career tech ed? Why is not vocational pathways? Why is not school to work pathways? Why is not center stage? Why is not the Department of Commerce and the Department of Education and the Department of Labor using and bringing in educators, bringing in the trades, bringing in the advanced manufacturers and saying, let's make sure not just that ICE has 10,000 new people, let's make sure there's 10,000 new jobs in advanced manufacturing. Let's make sure we are doing all this stuff. The fact that they turn their back on the future, that's what is wrong.
The Trump administration is arguing that the Department of Education was just simply not working. It wasn't getting the job done for Americans, and so they want to take it apart. The reality is, Trump and the Republicans are not going to be in power forever. That's just kind of how U.S. democracy works, right? So
we hope.
When there is a Democrat or a Republican that's allied with the cause of education, when there is a Democrat in power, would you advise that president to reinstate the Department of Education, or do you think there's a better system that can replace it?
Look, I think that there will be an opportunity for a better system that replaces it. Let me just say, my predecessor in my job years ago, Al Shanker, remember his name?
Yeah, he didn't think there should be a Department of Education.
No, right? He actually believed that it should stay in health, education, and welfare. And because what he was concerned about was when you actually took kids away from families in terms of what the government function should be, that kids didn't actually have somebody who's going to be lobbying for them.
So do you think there's opportunity then in the dismantling of the department?
I do think that there's opportunity in the future for re-envisioning what will really support children and what will support their education. I do think that there's opportunity. My problem is that in the destruction of what's happening right now, there's going to be millions and millions and millions of kids that get hurt. And while policymakers may think that, okay, it's fine, we can just look at what could happen in the next president, I care about kids in the here and now. I care about kids whose parents don't have an IEP right now because their school district is not doing it and they had nowhere else to go. I care, just like Lyndon Johnson cared about the fact that so many kids in America live in poverty and they get one good school meal a day. And where is that money going to? Or how do you lower class sizes if you don't have Title I? That this $20 to $30 billion of funding that goes directly to kids right now, where is it going to go? What's going to happen to kids? I care about that a lot. So yes, the future, you can build a new future. You can see a new future. There will be opportunity. It's not that it's the Department of Education per se. It's the function of what happens to kids right now.
So if you look at the most recent election cycle in November, Democrat-backed candidates ran successful campaigns in some of the nation's largest school systems and in political battlegrounds by going to what some would say is back to basics, emphasizing test scores and bus safety over some of the culture war debates that we've seen Republicans gain ground with in recent years. Are you taking lessons from those elections?
So it didn't get a lot of attention when I wrote this book or when the book was published, Why Fascists Fear Teachers. But repeatedly in the book, I talk about our job being not teaching kids what to think, but how to think. Our job is to actually help kids learn to think for themselves, to be able to discern fact from fiction. And ultimately, we have a right, like everybody else, to be out there fighting for the social issues that we care about. But when we're in a classroom, we should really be thinking about or figuring out how kids become critical thinkers, how they discern fact from fiction, how they actually help each other be the basic, amazing humans that they are, not be ideological. We should be actually much less political than people think we are as a union, or then certainly the cultural wars have been. So I think that what you saw, and frankly, it wasn't in most elections for school board, it wasn't Democrat versus Republican. Most of them are nonpartisan. It was pro-public education versus anti-public education. So take Sci-Fair in Texas, which was one of the places which Politico covered. And one of the candidates who won talked about why she won, which is they talked to parents and to teachers, and parents and teachers in partnership, who are the true partners for educating our kids. We're talking about the basics: literacy, engagement of kids, a safe and welcoming environment where we want kids to have the kind of robust curriculum that's going to make them interested. How do we get cell phones out of schools? How do we get distractions out of schools? These, to me, are the issues that people want schools to do. And this is what we need to be doing more and more in schools.
So when you hear parents say that they feel shut out of decision making in the classroom or feel like the system has stopped listening to them, what's your answer to those families?
My answer is, if they feel that way, we got to do something different and better, because that's what I hear from teachers all the time too. Teachers and parents, the people who are actually on the ground doing the work, they often feel shut out. That means that something is wrong in terms of a school not actually functioning as the center of a community, of a school not actually meeting needs. So I think what really happens in that instance is that people feel like the walls around them are too big. And how do you bring those walls down? How do you open people up? How do you have the conversation? And most of the time, it really just starts with really ensuring that parents feel welcome in schools. They don't feel pushed out. They feel welcome, that they can get their questions answered, and there can be a real dialogue with teachers.
Yeah, I don't think it's a coincidence that so much of the anger and the heat of the culture wars happened around the pandemic. I was out traveling around the country at the time covering these school board meetings, and parents upset about school closures, upset about what was being taught in the classrooms. I mean, all of that stuff kind of ended up being tied together. But I do wonder what you think, looking back to that tumultuous period of time. Do you think that teacher unions and Democrats have done enough self-examination in the role they played in pandemic school closures? Were there mistakes made?
Yeah, of course there were. And there were mistakes made by everyone. There was huge mistakes made by the Trump administration to not be clear, to not focus on safety as they were focusing on reopening it. Reopening became political, not became something that we all should have prioritized. And we all made mistakes about it. What I would say is that the anxiety, though, what the biggest mistake that I saw was that once we started knowing what could actually help schools reopen and reopen safely, meaning making sure you had ventilation and testing, the fact that we couldn't get the funding for ventilation and testing, the question to me is, God forbid there's another pandemic, how do we make that the priority so that we're not pitting reopening schools against being safe, but how do we find the funding that we make sure that schools are a priority? And, I'm kicking myself because the AFT, a month after schools closed, we were the first group to say, this is what we need to do to reopen schools safely. And it wasn't paid heed to. And the question really becomes, how do we make it much more a priority? How do we make kids much more a priority?
This kind of started during COVID. You've been a target of the GOP's, parental rights.
Well before.
Well, it started before, but it picked up some steam in that time. You touched on this a little bit earlier, but why do you think that you personally have become such a magnet for attacks from the right?
I think because people want teachers to be seen and not heard. People love teachers, but teachers need to have agency and support, and they need to have decent conditions. And parents and teachers actually need to do more and more and more work together and need to have more of a partnership. But I think the lightning rod happened particularly when Terry McAuliffe made a mistake in a debate and said, well, it's the teacher's responsibility to do the curriculum, not parents. And I would have said to him, as I did a couple of that night or the next day when I called him, I said, no, it's both of our responsibilities. Parents have to have a role in curriculum work, just like teachers have to have a role in curriculum work. But I just think let's find an adversary, let's find a scapegoat rather than solving the problem. And I think that because teacher unions are willing to stand up and teachers are more densely organized than anybody else, people need a voice. And so we become the voice, and so we become the target.
In your book, and you've talked about this publicly, about charter schools and school choice that have been embraced by Republicans and some Democrats too. Teacher unions have been leading the fight against the rapid expansion of charters. I wonder, though, if your position has changed or shifted in any way on that issue.
Well, Dasha, I run a charter school, and I have run a charter school since 2007, and it does extraordinarily well. So the issue for us is this is a charter school that's within the public space. We don't think there should be a competitive system. We think schools are centers of community, and if parents and others want to have a privatization piece, like, frankly, we saw in the aftermath of Brown versus Board of Education, what happened? Instead of integrating schools, public schools were closed. So that's where the choice movement started. I'm not suggesting that that's where it is right now, but what I'm suggesting is my job is to make sure that public schools are the best they can be. Public schools need to be strengthened, not abandoned. And so my concern about voucher movements in particular, it is about undermining the pluralism that we need as a diverse society, as a society that comes together in terms of public schooling. So someone wants a religious school, that's their right. Someone wants to homeschool, that's their right. My job is to do everything in my power to make every public school a place where parents want to send their kids, educators want to work, and kids thrive. And that's why if there's a public dollar that should go to a public school that you could use to lower class size, to create a library, to have extracurricular activities, and that public dollar doesn't go to that public school anymore. It goes to a voucher, it goes to a charter. So all of a sudden the public school can't have that library or can't have that extracurricular activity. My job is to get the public dollar so that we can do those things.
I don't think that we can talk about education in 2025 and certainly not almost 2026 without talking about AI. How do you see AI playing into public education? What do you think teachers should be doing right now to prepare for an AI future?
So I think there's two conversations that are going on right now in terms of AI and in terms of social media. There's a huge conversation being led by Jonathan Haidt and others that are finally starting to see and recognize what parents have and teachers have been saying to me for years, which is that these devices are what we compete with for kids more than anything else, for their attention, on bullying, on all sorts of things like that. And that these devices and the social media that comes with these devices, we need to figure out ways to be more restrictive of them. Kids need to use them less. Kids and adults, including myself, are quite addicted to them. So there's a conversation there. And what Jonathan Haidt and others have seen is that actually when in 2010 and 12, when the screens started to be easily accessible to young people, is when we started seeing real declines in test scores. And that is new research that was instinctive to us. Look, it had a huge jet fuel propulsion during COVID, but that's one set of things that are really important for us to be able to understand and figure out. That's why you have like a place like New York, distraction-free schools, cell phone-free schools. and it's worked out better than anybody anticipated it would. We thought there'd be lots of sturm and drum about the transition to distraction-free schools, and there hasn't been. It's been pretty remarkable in terms of New York, and teachers and kids are the better for it. The second piece of the conversation is on AI and more technology and what technology does. And I would say that there's two pieces here: what happens for teachers and what happens for kids. With social media and with so much also technology, teachers in some ways followed kids in terms of how to use it. We need the tools to be in teachers' hands in terms of the efficacy, having a sense of familiarity and a sense of knowledge about what the tool can do, because the tool can be very, very, very helpful, and the tool can take over our lives.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest fear for parents, students, teachers alike, right?
So if teachers actually are literate in the tool and can actually have some efficacy around the tool, then the teacher is in charge of the tool, not the student and not the tool itself. So that's why the AFT started an AI Institute with Microsoft as our lead partner, with Anthropic, with OpenAI. We've already trained several hundred folks since we started this in July. We made it place-based in New York so we can have a real development center, professional development center. And our hope is in this race that we're going to train thousands and thousands and thousands of teachers. That's really different than how the tool is used for kids. And the best story that I have is that some special ed teachers said to us in the first set of training, they figured out how to use AI to do read alouds. So since they can't be with every single child in a special needs classroom, and many special needs classrooms have paras, but you need to have small group instructions when you do read alouds. And so what happened was that they could train the AI to actually work with kids to do read alouds so that they could actually spread themselves further than just, a
That does
teacher
sound
and a
like
parent.
something that's going to need some funding at some point.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is that teacher ingenuity was remarkable. You can see how AI can reduce paperwork. You can see how it can help you refine a lesson. You can see how it can do these kind of things. But if we don't actually get the regulation side right, meaning, and this is why the right wing hates me, because people have to be able to have safety. There has to be privacy. The tech companies can't rule everything.
I do think there's some bipartisanship on that issue.
Yeah, like Steve Bannon and I agree on that issue.
That's the headline. That's the headline for this episode now.
But the tech companies don't want any regulation. They want to rule everything. And what's happened is that the safety considerations and the privacy considerations that regular people have, including teachers, including parents, are going to be so great that the technology is not going to be used in the way that it's not going to be harnessed in the way it ought to. Good regulation helps actually marshal good innovation.
Before I let you go, I have to ask about your book, which does have the F word in it. I'm talking fascism. Your book is titled
F word.
Why Fascists Fear Teachers, Public Education and the Future of Democracy. Talk a little bit about the F word. Where did the idea for a book about fascism and education come from?
So look, if you see my shelf behind me, there's one shelf that has all sorts of education books. And underneath that shelf, it has all sorts of books about fascism, about history. Spoiler alert, I am Jewish. I am married to a rabbi. I learned about the Holocaust as I was growing up. I had members of my family, extended family, that didn't get to America perish in the Holocaust. So I learned the word fascism at a very early age and understood that never again should actually mean never again for everyone. And so as a student of history, watching, particularly when people like General Kelly and General Milley tried to warn Americans near the end of the last cycle, near the end of the 2024 election, about the potential for fascistic behavior in our government and watching it being mocked, I was really, really worried because the question became, and that's when, in some ways, the title to this book changed to that. The question really became, what do we do to educate people about ensuring children, adults, that there is a better way? And the better way is about hope and opportunity. And that starts with education. So in some ways, teachers become, because as Putin said, and a teacher gave me one of these stickers, Putin said, wars are won by teachers. What teachers do is they create opportunity. They help kids learn how to critically think, just like the founders understood that education was a bulwark against tyranny. In some ways, we're coming full circle. Education is the bulwark against tyranny. Education is the bulwark against fascism. And that's why fascists fear teachers.
I think that's the perfect place to end it. Randi Weingarten, thank you so much for joining me in the middle of a crazy end to this crazy year.
Thank you.
This has been The Conversation with Dasha Burns. And if you want to catch future episodes of The Conversation, be sure to click that subscribe button below. Thanks for watching.